Okay, so this is the third set of 6. This one introduces the SAS Private Cloud Edition. We're going to be covering an installation on 2008, an installation on 2012, the SAS NPS agent installation, and then we're going to take a look at some system settings and some post-installation settings. So again, like we've been doing with the other series, we look at our network diagram. We can see in the first series we had our sync agent with our 2 user stores, AD and SQL. In the second series we added Windows Logon agent, the IIS agent, and the logging agent. This series we're going to be adding to our network diagram the SAS servers. So this one will cover installation on both 2012, 2008. They are quite similar, so we will see a slight repeat of what we're doing 2012, 2008. We'll also show you the NPS agent installation and configuration on 2008. And as I mentioned, we're going to look at some post-install, for example, directory structure, show you a few examples of what we have in the actual directories where we've installed the platform. We'll take a look at some of the services that are running. We'll take a look and review the IIS and application pools. So first of all, let's talk quickly about some of the new things that we added in this release that's available for download. So we've introduced Mobile Pass in 3.3, eToken 3400. We added support for migrations for the SafeWord platform. And we've added some features within the SAS UI, such as dormant account lockout, UTC offset, some pin change policy settings, authentication realms for trusted external users. Our external operators, we now have self-service authorities. We've got UI access restrictions for IP management. Pre-authentication rules now include date and time access restrictions. On the SAS server side changes, we support the following: external logging agents, which we've covered, Oracle Access Manager agent, Siebel CRM agent, the IIS web agent, Exchange 2013, and Windows 8 logon agent. So we take a look at the requirements for installing the SAS platform on your own network. So we support 2008 R2, 2012 R2. On the database side, Postgres 9.3 comes included in the package. We also support different variations of the Microsoft SQL, and we also support MySQL. Now, SAS PCE can use LDAP as a direct connect. It can also utilize the sync agent. We support, again, for direct connect, AD, eDirectory, Sun1, and that's also included and supported, as you know, from the previous modules with the sync agent. We provide both 32 and 64-bit binaries. PCE supports both NPS and FreeRadius. Now, a lot of customers will not really have a preference whether it's NPS or FreeRadius. Again, a lot of customers that I deal with personally, they're more Windows shops, so they're happy to go with NPS. Where I find customers will install FreeRadius and not NPS is if they want to be able to add off nodes inside the SAS UI and have the off nodes being registered without having to restart the Radius service. So if a customer, perhaps maybe a service provider, which we'll look at Monday, Tuesday next week, they may have an SLA, which means that the authentication is always up. So it's probably recommended that they go with a FreeRadius rather than NPS. Also, if you're looking to use the SAS UI for the Radius return attributes, so enable, in order to add an attribute to a user or a group inside the SAS UI, it's best practice to use FreeRadius rather than NPS. So there's a few differences. Today I'm going to be discussing and installing NPS with NPS Agent. We do support SQL as a user store. The solution supports PAP and MS Chat v2, and as you can see, one of the agents that we have for the Service Provider Edition is kind of the free radius for NPS. We support IIS 7.8, ASP.NET 2.05 or above. We have some minimum and recommended settings for processor, memory, disk space. We'll take a look at the ports. So all of our management sessions are either port 80 or 443. Again, in the cloud, it's all 443. When you go on-prem, again, if you want to use 80, you can. If you have a certificate, you can use 443. We use UDP 1812, 1813 for accounting, respectively, for radius. We have our ports for our LDAP. We have our ports for our Postgres, our Microsoft SQL database, our MySQL database. Port 25 for SMTP. We have our TCP 8456 for LDAP syncing. And then with the logging agent, we have 8458 and 8459 as the ports that are being used. So let's begin by going through an installation on Windows 2012 R2. So the first thing we need to do is we need to prep the server. So in order to prep the server, we need to add some roles. We need to add the NPS and IIS role. So we select role base, we click on next, we select the server pool, we click on next. We choose to install network policy and access services. We add this feature. We scroll down, we add our IIS feature, and we click next. We need .NET Framework. .NET Framework 3.5 includes .NET 2.05, which is required by SAS. We complete our NPS role selection. Now for IIS, we do need to include .NET 3.5, and we also need to include IIS 6 compatibility. Again, if you don't have these versions of .NET or the IIS 6 compatibility, the installation will fail and you will receive errors, and I will show you in a few moments what these errors are. So we go ahead and we're adding here, as you can see, our .NET Framework, NPS, IIS, including the compatibility mode. I'm just going to move this along a little bit quicker. Okay, so these features are now installed on my 2012 R2 server. So I download the SAS package that's available from our website. I unextract it. Under the software, under Windows, under SAS, we're going to find the 32 and 64-bit installers. I right-click and run as administrator the 64-bit installer. I go through the wizard, so I accept the license. I choose my location. Now when I get to this section here, I'm just going to pause the video for a moment. When we get to this section here, this is where we can determine it's a complete install or a custom install. So what I would say here is, if a customer is using their own database, so they've got their own setup of Microsoft or they've got their own cluster, I would do a custom install and remove the installation of Postgres. If this is perhaps a customer is doing a POC or they wish to use Postgres, then we can do a complete install. So there's no need to install a database if the customer already has one. So we're going to do a complete install. We click on next. And the installation begins. Postgres pops up and installs 9.3. And we go through the installation. It does take a few moments, and using some video editing, I have shortened this down to just a few, maybe like 30 or 40 seconds, so you can see all of the creating the application pools, starting the services, connecting to the database for the first time. Sorry. So we'll get a pop-up for the initializer, the drivers for the initializer. The initializer is a device that's used to program the RB-1 token or the KT4 token. These are USB-based initializers, so there is a driver for that. And the installation finishes, and we can launch the Safe Authentication Server UI. So the first time we log in, we need to log in as a local or a domain administrator. If we are using domain, we need the domain / the account, and we need the password for that user. We click login, and you can see here, this is something that you don't see in SAS Cloud, is we actually see a Systems tab. Okay, so this is slightly different than you would log in as an operator or an account manager. So again, users can log in as operators to manage the virtual server. Account managers can log in at the service provider level and see the onboard, dashboard, virtual server, and administration. But when we're setting the system up, when we log in as an administrator, we see this new tab called System. You can actually see at the top right-hand corner, we're logged in as the system account. So the first thing we need to do is we need to tell it about the database. So I select that we're using Postgres. I choose the Postgres. I define where my server is, my port, my database, my username, and my password. Now in this recording, I use localhost. I strongly advise not to use localhost anywhere on the system where possible. Use the IP address, okay? For example, tomorrow when we talk about importing sites or building additional sites of SAS, you will find that when you try to import a site record from another SAS server, if you have localhost, it will fail. So where possible, please use or please make sure that the customers are using the IPs rather than localhost. The default password for Postgres is password $ with a capital P. I click on next, it makes a connection, tells me that there's no database. Do you want to connect and create? We click on yes. The system goes and creates the Black Shield database, and it provides us with our cipher keys. Now these are used to back up, and we will talk about these in a future module. I click on done, and we have now completed the first step, which is connecting SAS to the database. The second step is adding a license. So I'm going to use the trial license. So it's two pieces. There's an there's an activation code and a license file. So under software license, you can see here, this is our activation key. So I'm just going to copy this to my clipboard. And then I'm going to point to the actual license file, click open, click paste, and import this license. So now the license will be added to the database and license the system accordingly. The next step is to define where my SMTP server is. So I mentioned this yesterday. We can define SMTP, so we need to define the IP and authentication if required. We then set our self-service, our self-enrollment URL, and our operator validation URLs. And you can see we're now at the onboarding stage. So like we discussed on Monday, this is onboarding the root service provider, so the very top of the hierarchical tree. The minimum requirement is an account name. You can see it's active as a service provider, and as per my license, I have 10 capacity. I'll just show you this license here. This is the eval license that comes with the platform. It gives you 10 capacity, 10 of the MP-1, 10 of the grid, and 10 of the mobile pass. So that's the installation. That's the basic installation complete. Now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to install the NPS agent, because we want to, in this environment, we're going to use Radius NPS on the same box. So again, under software, under Windows, under agents, under 64-bit, we can see an NPS IAS agent. So I'm going to run this as administrator and begin this process. So I go through the wizard for the installation. I accept the license agreement. I choose where the installation this agent will be installed. Again, I have the ability to tell it, this agent, where is my primary and where is my secondary SAS server. So in this environment, we're only setting up today the one SAS server. Again, I've used localhost here. You will see shortly that I actually go back and change this to the actual IP, simply because it's recommended to use IPs where we can rather than localhost. So that installation completes. You can see we have a guide. You can see this guide talks about the key file, so downloading the key file and adding it to the agent location. It also gives you some settings for using NPS on 2008, 2012. It also gives you some information about older versions such as IAS. I'm going to select step 3, which is configuring NPS. We can see here there's a number of steps that need to be completed. One of them is creating a connection request policy. So in step 6, I'm going to highlight the name because I'm going to use that name to create my connection request policy, allow all users to authenticate with SAS. I copy this. I then go to my administrative tools. I open up my NPS, and I'm going to go to my connection request under policies. I'm going to go to my connection request policies. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new policy. Now this policy, I provided the name as per the instructions, and I'm going to add date and time conditions. Now SAS has the ability to restrict based on date and time, so we want NPS to just pass everything to us. So I permit all. Under authentication, I accept without validating credentials because this is purely based on date and time, and I complete this step. Anytime I make any changes inside NPS, I need to restart NPS. So you'll see here that I'll be going through some restarts. Just to show you an example of adding a Radius client to NPS, under Radius clients, you right-click, you provide it with a friendly name, an IP address, and a shared secret. So I'm going to put in a test Radius client. I'm going to provide an IP address where I have a Radius client running or a test client, maybe like NT-RADPing as an example. I define my shared secret. Now, like I mentioned, I need to do a restart. Anytime we add an auth node inside NPS, we need to restart NPS. So you can imagine if you're a service provider, using NPS may not be the best simply because you're constantly restarting it every time an auth node is added. So that's where we recommend free Radius. If I'm a single customer with a couple of Radius clients, it's probably NPS will suffice. So I go ahead and I stop my NPS and I start my NPS. And now those settings that I've just added and that Radius client that I've added, they're populated and the system's ready to start authenticating. Now there's a couple of settings I just want to show you here under NPS. So you can see I now have an item here for NPS. Oops, sorry, I'm actually going to grab my IP of this box just so that I can use it within NPS. So where I used localhost before, I'm now simply going to change that to the IP within the NPS agent. So now I start the NPS agent. Under communications, I'm going to define that agent IP, or the SAS IP, and again, anytime I make any changes, I need to restart NPS. So we've installed SAS, we've added the license, and we can see now under my virtual server, under comms, because we have an agent, we need to add the agent as an auth node. So under auth nodes, I'm going to create a new auth node. I'm going to give it a description of my NPS agent and the IP, and I'm going to click on Save. And this is a very basic installation of SAS with NPS on 2012. So let's take a look at some of the errors that you can see during that installation. So if you try to install the SAS package and you don't have any IIS installed, it is a prerequisite. If you don't have it installed, you will receive a pop-up that gives you an error stating that you need to have some form of IIS. If you do not have .NET installed, you'll be prompted to have and install .NET. And again, we require .NET 2.05 or above. By installing .NET 3.5, that gives us the .NET 2.05 that we need. This catches a lot of customers because they don't, it's not really documented as such that we need to have IIS 6 compatibility. So if you don't, when you added the IIS role, if you did not select IIS 6 compatibility and you complete the SAS install when it opens up the first time to localhost/console, it's going to pop you this 500.19 internal server error. This basically means that you don't have IIS 6 compatibility mode. Okay, so if you see this across support, look out for it because it's a very simple fix. You go back to roles and you simply add the IIS 6 compatibility mode. So now we're going to take a look at the same installation, but doing it on 2008 R2. Like I mentioned, some of the steps are quite similar. So we'll just go through this quickly just so that you see both 2012 and 2008. So again, I need to add my roles. In this case, I'm going to be adding IIS and NPS again. So I select to install my NPS, Network Policy and Access Service, and my IIS. I select NPS for my role services. Now on IIS, again, I need to have .NET, so I'm going to select to add these particular requirements. And that's basically everything I need here. I don't need to add any compatibility with 2008. I click on Next, and we complete adding of these roles. I'll just move it along a little quicker here. So there we go. Those roles have now been installed successfully. I now go to my SAS package where I've got my installation. So I've got my 64-bit installer. I'm going to run this as administrator and again go through the similar steps that we do for 2012. So I go through the wizard starts, I click next, I accept the license, end user license agreement, I click next, I choose the location where I want to install SAS. Again, if I'm using Postgres as the database, I will do a complete install. If I'm not using Postgres and I'm using another database, I will do a custom install and remove the Postgres, put a little X under Postgres to not have that component installed. When I complete this installation, again, it's very similar to what we have. Just going to scroll it along here just to save a little bit of time because we have seen this. Okay, our installation complete. We leave the checkbox to start SAS. To access SAS as an administrator, you need to be on the box. The URL is localhost/console. Like I mentioned previous, we need to log in as a local or a domain administrator. So I type in my administrator username, I type in my password, and again, it's going to ask us about the database, the license, our SMTP settings, and our 3 URLs that are used with the system. So again, the password here for Postgres is password with a capital P $ is the default password. I click on next. It found the database. So it connects to the database, creates the database called Black Shield, and then step 2, I'm prompted to add my license file. So like I mentioned previous, it's 2 components. There's a key and an activation key and a license file. And we import in this license the system inside the database. We select our SMTP settings, we click apply. We apply our self-service URL. We apply our self-enrollment URL. And we apply our operator URL. And this takes us to onboarding of the root virtual server. Based on the license, it will be active. It's a service provider account, and we can see the license gives us, the eval license gives us certain capacity and certain tokens. So taking a look at some additional errors, again, this error you will get on 2008 or 2012. This is no disk space. So I'm trying to install the SAS package and I don't have enough disk space. I will receive this error message. Again, if I don't have IIS, which is a requirement, if I don't have IIS role installed, I will receive an error that I have no IIS. So in 2008, I've made a separate video for NPS so we could show some more of the features inside the actual the agent itself. So if we take a look at this video, you've already seen the installation of the agent itself. We've seen that on 2012, so I'm just going to fast forward until this agent is complete. Again, we pop open our configuration guide, and we're going to create a connection request policy and add an auth node. So again, step 6 is allow all users to authenticate. I'm going to copy this information because I need it for creating my connection request policy. So in 2008, I open up my network policy server. And I perform these steps again. Again, very similar to what we've done on 2012 if we're using NPS. So under policies, connection request policies, we right-click, we create a new policy, we paste in the name from the guide, we click on next, we add date and time, we permit all, so all permitted date and time, we click OK, we click on next, accept users without validating credentials because this is for date and time, and we complete this wizard. Again, adding of a radius client on 2008 NPS is very similar to what we did in 2012. We're going to give it a name, we're going to give it an IP address, we're going to give it a shared secret, and we're going to restart IAS NPS to take effect those settings. So we need to make sure that we have an auth node for all of the agents. So make sure that there is an auth node registered. We will receive an error in the snapshots tab if the auth node is not registered. So now we can go and we can start the NPS configuration tool. And we can take a look at some of the additional options that we have. So we have a number of tabs. We have our settings, our comms, our test, logging, and localization. So under the settings, we have the ability to enable and disable the agent. We have the ability to send the client IP address to Black Shield. We have migration mode, so if we're using like a proxy, like an NPS IAS proxy, we can enable migration mode. And for troubleshooting and debugging, we have the ability to turn on some verbose logging, which is located in the tracing directory. We can enable this for troubleshooting. Under the communications, again, we have the primary, secondary IPs. Again, please don't use localhost. Please use the IP address. We have our timeout, our retries, and we have our agent key file. So again, in SAS, all SAS installations have a default key file. All agents use that default key file. What I do with customers when I'm in the field is I kind of set it all up using the default key files. And then what we do once we know it's all connecting and working, then one at a time, we download the key file and we add it to the agent and we test it, and we move to the next agent. We download the key file, we add it to the agent, we test it, just for simplicity. Under authentication testing, we have the ability to perform an authentication test by providing a username and a passcode. We also have the ability to check the server status. And if you click on test, you should see a pop-up that tells you that you can that the server is up or the server is down. It's a nice way to do a simple test from this particular agent. We have our logging levels. So again, we have 1 through 5 logging levels. We have our log file location. And again, there are registry settings with all of our agents that allow you to define additional levels of debug. Like all of our agents, we have localization, so we can customize some of those pieces. So that's the installation on 2012 with NPS, 2008, and 2008 NPS. Now I'm going to take a look in the UI because I mentioned to you there's a new tab that we don't normally see in SAS Cloud. We only see it on PCE and SPE. This is the Systems tab. So I'm just going to review the Systems tab and just point out some of the important things that we have on the Systems tab. So again, we're logging in as our local or our domain administrator. So you see we're logged in as the system level. You can see we have a system and a setup module. So under task, we have our connection to our database. We have our license. We have our sites, so we can see our SAS sites. Currently have one site that's enabled. I'll be showing you this later in the other module about exporting and importing and building additional SAS sites. It's quite simple. You download the site export file key and the site file, and you import it to your secondary SAS server. We have our FreeRadius synchronization, so if we are using FreeRadius rather than NPS, we need to enable this option. This effectively, what happens with FreeRadius, we will review this, is when an operator adds an auth node in SAS, the FreeRadius updater agent, it pulls SAS. Again, there's an X value, for example, every minute or every 5 minutes, and it checks to see if there's any auth nodes. And if it finds an auth nodes, it writes that information to the freeradiusclients.conf file. So you'll notice in our SAS cloud environment where we add an auth node, there's a little line there that says the auth nodes will be active in approximately 5 minutes. That's simply because we're polling at a certain interval to check that auth nodes have been added to populate the clients.conf file. Now this is the system configuration details. Okay, the system configuration details, oops, let me just scroll back a little bit. The system configuration details tells me the version, and it tells me all the connection details for SQL, my license, the database, all of my details that I'm using on the system. So what I would recommend when you're dealing with a customer in support, and it's a private cloud edition or service provider edition, the first thing I would always recommend you do is ask them for the system configuration details. This will give you information about their system, specifically the version that they're using and how it's being connected to a database, to a user source, and their license. Okay? So try and get that system configuration details as soon as you can. We've got a provisioning delay time, so this is when we provision tokens, we can have the system delay. The default is 5. We also have under setup the ability to define some settings for HSM. Under communications, we can define our SMS, SMTP settings and messaging. Again, so we reviewed this yesterday, so you can see we've got a number of plugins that are available for SMS interoperability. We do give you the ability to have a primary and secondary SMS gateway. So some customers choose to have one vendor perhaps as a plugin for primary and a second vendor for secondary in the event that, if they're using a SMS OTP token, having two would always be better than having one in case of some type of failure. We have our email settings, our email messaging, again, port 25. If you do require authentication, please enter in the username and password. These are all the SMS messages. So because we can customize SMS and SMTP, we have messages that go out by SMS and SMTP. All of these SMS and email messages are fully customizable. Again, we have our email messages. So again, this is what I mentioned earlier on a previous module. It's very important to make sure your customer understands that we can customize these email messages, because some of them go to end users, some of them go to operators, some of them are for token enrollment, and some of them are for alerting. Okay, so you can see we've got about 40. Last time I counted, there was about 40 of these different types of email messages. Again, it's always recommended that we customize them. So if a customer comes to you from the support desk and says, I've received these emails and we don't like the language, or we want to change the language, again, this is where you would come to update that information. And we support both text format and HTML format. And you can see inside the actual body of the message, there are some parameters. I don't advise you to change anything within the less than or greater than symbols, because those are used for the system for processing. Under logging, we have our thresholds and we have our event recipients. We also have some logging and archiving. So on the system itself, we have the ability to define default or high logging levels. We can log to the event viewer, to a tab file, or to a syslog. So if you are troubleshooting a customer with with a SAS system, and you may not be receiving much information inside the Black Shield log file, I would recommend coming in here and changing this from default to high to see if it gives you some additional information inside the log file. We also have the ability to do archiving, so we can archive the last year of data from the system. So when you're upgrading from previous versions of SAS, there's a few things that you need to consider. So our assumptions are the database is peer-to-peer, and it's deployed in a replication model. All SAS servers are pointed towards the primary SQL instance, and the SAS database is backed up. We need to make sure that our cipher keys from all of our SAS servers are backed up. So when we establish the connection to the database, you'd have seen a little text in red that talks about our cipher keys. Again, we'll always make sure that customers remove those files from the SAS system. In case of catastrophic disk failure, you do have a copy of those files. Again, make sure that your license is backed up, your license files. Make sure that any versions of SAS you have on that server, you've backed them up or you have them somewhere else just for best practice. And because we support virtualization, it's always recommended that we take a snapshot again before upgrading, just as a best practice. So the process to upgrade is we back up the cipher export and export file key from the SAS server and move them to a safe location. We make a backup of the database, again, moving it to a safe location. We delete all publication and subscriptions on all SQL instances. We delete the database on all Microsoft SQL instances except for the primary. We upgrade the primary SAS server to the new version. Upgrading the database instance will take place during this step. We then upgrade the primary SAS server to the new version. We upgrade all other SAS servers to this new version. We stop IIS. We stop the Black Shield services on all SAS service, and we make a backup of the SAS database from the primary instance and move it to a safe location. We import the updated SAS database in the other SQL instances. So if there's other SAS sites, we need to do this step. We then need to rebuild or set up replication between the two SQL sites. And again, we can start the IIS and Black Shield services on all the SAS servers. When you're upgrading SAS, again, you take the package, you right-click it, you run as an administrator, you accept the user license, you define where the location. The system will say, we've found an existing version, do you want to perform an upgrade? You simply click on yes, and it will upgrade that version of SAS to the latest release. Now, in previous versions of SAS, we had an older version of Postgres, so I've included some steps here if you wish to upgrade Postgres of an existing SAS installation. And there's a few steps and some points that need to be followed. So now that SAS has been installed, let's take a look at some of the post-installation things that we can review and set up. So we're going to take a look at some items in the directory structure. We'll take a look at the Windows services. We're going to take an overview of IIS, application pools. I've also added a section on enabling certificates for IIS. These are for customers that, in the DMZ, they may have a SAS site for self-service and self-enrollment, and they want to have an SSL certificate. Or if you're using a mobile pass token, again, it does require SSL, and we'll take a look at some application pools. So once the installation has been completed, you will see under C Program Files, CryptoCard Black Shield, this is our directory structure. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of these items. I've picked out a few key ones that I think that will be important to you, and they are as follows. The BSID CA, which is the WSDL. We've got a database migrator. We've got a Black Shield log directory, and we've also got a token validator WSDL as well. If you want more information on each of these, what is in each of these directories, just drop me an email, and I'll be more than happy to help you to understand what's inside these directories. So as you may or may not know, SAS has two types of management APIs. Two types of APIs. One is a management API and one is an authentication API. Inside the authentication API, we have a Java and .NET for authentication. So the management API, this is it here. It's the BSID CA. You can all reach this if you go to your browser and you open up in our cloud system, cloud.safenet-inc.com/BSIDCA, and this will open up the WSDL, or the WSDL. So any programming language that can consume the WSDL can effectively make calls to our API. Now there's lots of information here, and there's lots and lots of different calls. Basically, pretty much anything that you can do inside the SAS UI with a mouse and a keyboard, you can actually do with the management API. Now, when you click on each of these links, we'll actually provide you with some SOAP examples, for doing your own coding as a customer. If you do need help with the management API or the authentication API, just let the professional services team. We'd be more than happy to discuss this with a customer that you're dealing with. We have this DB migrator or DB migration. Again, this is not migrating from SafeWord or Crypto Shield or Black Shield to SAS. This is simply a tool that we have on the system. Sometimes customers will install Postgres and get the system up and running in a POC, and then they decide, hey, we want to now go live and we don't want to recreate everything. We have a tool that allows you to effectively copy a source database to a destination database. So effectively, you click on the source, you configure it, you define which database, you give it the host name, the port, the database name, the username and password. Then we select configure the destination, and we complete these as well. And then we have the ability to copy that data from one type of database to another. This is our log folder, so we see some logs about authentication, operator, tokens, user data. And this is where we have our Black Shield log file as well. We also have token validator, so this is where all the agents They all speak to token validator for authentication. And we can see here we also have a check server status. So some customers may want to create a script or create their own API to check the server status of SAS. This is where you would do so. So we take a look at IIS. This is a brief overview. So we can see here, this is my IIS on 2008. Under my default website, I have my Black Shield self-service. I have my BSID CA. I have my console. I have my free radius config. I have my self-service, my SMS web service, and I have my token validator. The application pools that we have is we have Black Shield ID, BSID CA, BSID console, BSID enroll, BSID self-service, free radius config, and again our SMS web service. And we can see here, this is the IIS directory structure, the application pool, and a description of what these application pools actually are. So I added this section because it comes up a lot when I'm delivering PS and installing customer environments. They do ask me about adding certificates to IIS. So in order to enroll a mobile pass token as an example, a certificate must be generated and associated with SAS and IIS. There are basically two requirements. We need a Microsoft CA and we need a SAS server, either in a standalone or in a domain. And there are 4 steps to create, to complete this process. Step 1, we need to create the certificate request from IIS. Step 2, generate the certificate from the Microsoft CA, importing the IIS and Microsoft root certificate, and then modifying the SAS self-enrollment URLs to use SSL. Now, I'm not going to go through this in fine details because we do have this information in a guide, in our installation guide. So I'm just going to quickly just show you what is required in each of the steps. So we create a certificate request from IIS in step 1. Define our distinguished name properties. We're then going to define the location where our certificate request text is located. We're going to open this. We're now going to generate the certificate from the Microsoft CA. Again, there's a set of steps for step 2. I provided some screenshots as well. We request a certificate, we view the status, and we download the CA or the certificate chain or the CRL. We now need to submit the certificate request or renewal request. Step 3, we import into IIS and the Microsoft root certificate. So we've got some steps in doing that here. A couple of screenshots as well. And finally, step 4, we need to modify the self-service URLs in SAS. So effectively, we're going to log into our SAS environment, and we're going to change the base URL from an HTTP to HTTPS. And we can see here under policies, under automation policies, under our self-enrollment policy, we discussed this yesterday. You can see here we've changed this to HTTPS. We have some Windows services I just want to review with you as well. We have our Black Shield auto provisioning service, our free radius service, our Black Shield ID monitor service, our proxied source service, and our Black Shield reporting service. I've provided you with some description of each of these services. So the Black Shield ID auto provision, this runs at a configured interval of time and attempts to self-enroll Black Shield ID users with a token based on rules within auto provisioning. I mentioned the Black Shield free radius service. This listens on port 5041, and free radius updater polls the service via a service every X minutes. So we can define this, and I will review this next Monday when we talk about adding free radius to our network diagram and adding SAML to our network diagram. Black Shield ID monitor. This runs approximately every 5 minutes. It performs a series of checks to see if any alerts configured within the Systems tabs need to be sent. It also performs our log archiving. Black Shield ID proxy source server. This listens for incoming connections from the Black Shield sync agent to maintain a local copy of the remote user source. And the Black Shield ID reporting service. This processes all reports scheduled to run on the Black Shield ID management console. And this concludes this module, and I will open up to any questions that we have.
Hey Roy, this is Ayat from SafeNet Noida. We have talked about installation of SAS, and yesterday I was doing the same process. While installing the database, I kept the option for Postgres, and then on the next window it asked about the server. So inside the server was by default localhost was there, and the installation was successful. But when I'm changing the word local, sorry, if I'm replacing the word localhost to the IP address of the same computer, then it says it's not successful. So is there any obvious reason behind this?
So you configured it using localhost, and then you went back and reconfigured it with the IP?
Yes.
What was the error message? Can you tell me the error message?
The same thing, like it could not connect or something like that. If, I can do it right now. Meanwhile, in case if someone else can ask the question, I will let you know that.
If you want to send me a screenshot of the log file, that may help. I actually have a text file that I could probably share with Mo and Phil, and it basically lists all of the different. I guess there are hundreds of error messages. I'll see if I can find it here. If you just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so in one of the previous versions of SAS inside the database, I was able to extract all the different error codes. So this may be useful for you. Sometimes, sometimes our error codes are not very informative, like a object is not set to a reference of an object. That could mean many things. Sometimes it just gives us a specific error number. So what I'll do is I'll share these. What I'll do is I will share these with Mo and Phil, and this effectively is all of the different. Now, I'd have to check to see if there's any new ones added in the next, in the current release, but this will give you a base of all of the different error messages and a small description of what they are. Okay.
So actually, in my case, there was no error code, or nothing like that. It was only saying that the observability servers could not connect with the given information.
What I could do with you is after this WebEx, if you have a couple of minutes, drop me an email directly, and I'll start a fresh WebEx with you, and I'll see if I can give you some assistance in troubleshooting. We can take a look at, see if we can reproduce it. I'll see if I can reproduce it in my lab environment, or see if it's something that simply, we can fix with, with your environment.
Okay. Thanks.
So yeah, I extracted all these error codes. I was hoping to put them into an Excel spreadsheet and basically talk with some of our colleagues in Ottawa, perhaps some of the guys on SAS operations like Todd or Felix or Alan, and see if we could get the air code, the definition, and then kind of some English language or something that's more helpful in knowing what that air actually means. Now, I haven't had a chance to do that simply because my schedule with professional services is very busy, but I'll share these with you so that you have all of these different air codes. I feel it may be useful if you're troubleshooting a call and somebody says, oh, I have air 5368. I guess at least you can see what that particular air message does state. Anybody else have any questions about this series? Okay, well, thank you very much for joining today. I will package up the recording of this WebEx and the slides, the videos, the documents that are associated with this module, and I will send them to Holger, to Mo, and to Phil, and they will distribute them to you. Thank you very much, and we'll speak with you tomorrow.